Excellent. So I'm very happy to be back here. And I have to tell you one story. And it's going to be a very sad story. So it's lunch coming up and we're supposed to be kind of having fun and everything. And I'm going to share some things that kind of really had a tremendous influence on me. This was a sad year because this was the year of GDPR. Anybody familiar with this abbreviation? Anybody excited about GDPR? One person is excited. One person is excited. My goal is to make you tattoo GDPR on your arm by the end of the day. And it's not a joke, by the way. And actually, when this thing came up, and those of you who don't know what it is if you ever stumbled upon cookie pop-ups somewhere saying, hey, we want to get as much data from you as possible, please give us access to it, right? If you ever stumbled upon something like that, this is kind of GDPR in play. And I asked myself, so where does it come from? Like, why all of a sudden we all are so obsessed with privacy? And all of a sudden we spend so much time, can you hear me okay? Oh, it's just me then. I asked myself, how come that we spend so much time these days trying to figure out how we can kind of adjust our interfaces for privacy? So I spent this entire year working out all of that. Oh, this is a weird setting. Hold on. This is not what's supposed to happen. Is it? I hope not. Is it? Yeah, that's better now. And essentially, in the beginning, it was supposed to be all about personality. But in the end, it's really all about privacy. And the things you're going to see today, you will not be able to unsee. So I don't take any responsibility for whatever happens next on stage. And I think that's also very important to understand that, because the things that we're going to cover are not beautiful in any way, right? I was interviewing students, and I was teaching at the University of Amsterdam, and I was going to Belgrade, and I was going to Ukraine, and I was going to Germany, I was going to Austria, and every time I would ask the same question: how do people see the web? I mean, I don't know about you, but when I grew up with the web, I remember when the web didn't exist. Anybody remembers these times? Yeah, a couple of people. For many people, today, this is kind of not even possible, unimaginable. But the web that we used to have many, many years ago is very different from the web that we have today, right? Anybody remembers ICQ? Oh, this brings back memories. ICQ was redesigned, by the way, 2 years ago. So you can feel free to, log in and find your friends or not. But it's really interesting to see that this shift has been very profound, and it has actually a very profound impact on how we see the web as well. So how did we end up in the world where this is normal, right? This is not normal to most of us. If aliens ever came to the planet, they'd be very surprised why we just get used to it and we just take it, right? This is not a normal thing, right? And in the end, it's actually getting much worse than that. Because if you start looking about interfaces, right, these are some of the interfaces you will eventually find out, discover. Like here, this is the German form on a bank insurance form, where they ask a couple of questions. One of them is, do you have children? Now, why would you want to use a slider to ask or design the answer to that question? Because slider has this really strange property. It has a minimum value and a maximum value, and luckily, designers and developers taken care of the minimum value, which is 0, but the maximum value also has to be defined, and in that case, it's 5. Right? So if you want to change it from 5 to, let's say, 6 or 7, you can do that by clicking on the pencil icon right here, right? Then this thing turns into an input field, right? And only then it can change. But then if you plug in 6 or 7, they will tell you, 5, because they know better, right? And so then interfaces are really just incredibly disrespectful in many ways, right? If we actually start looking deeper, they are everywhere. Now, this is not going to look beautiful, right? But I think it's important to see this in action. This is one of the services that somebody decided is a good idea to design. If you don't like bugs, please close your eyes now. So you'll end up on this beautiful site that kind of encourages you to find the tool to kill insects and mosquitoes in your apartment. And I can only imagine a designer sitting in front of Sketch or Photoshop thinking, let's add a bit of blue here. Or a little bit of red, just let's make it pop up a bit more, right? Just really, really horrible. And guess what? How often do you see a bug on a slider? Not often, right? And then you answer a couple of questions, where have the bugs invaded, and a couple of things like that. And we're laughing because we think it's ridiculous, but many people just see the web this way. This is a very normal thing for them, right? And then this is the answer that they're giving you. Ironically, this is the only product that they were selling at the time on the entire site, right? But then, of course, there are things, the companies that are not just bad, they're just evil. Evil companies. Many of you might remember Ryanair, and I'm like an elephant, I never forget. Ryanair has redesigned, but I will never, ever forget what they did. Because for a long time, when you were booking a flight with Ryanair, insurance was added in for you automatically, unless you know how to opt out. But to opt out, you need to be able to opt out, and that's really kind of difficult to do, because you need to find Don't Insure Me conveniently located between Denmark and Finland. Right? Right here at the bottom, which is just mean in so many ways. And then we get this, like Instagram ads, where, you know, people don't like to have dirt on the phone. So if we Photoshop in a hair or dirt, well, engagement rates increase, right? And this was making rounds. And then somebody said, we can do better. Let's do better. Let's just add some dirt. A little bit of dirt. You know, for Photoshop, it's kind of the same, right? And then we ended up in this really new world of push notifications. Who doesn't like a good push notification? Right? And then here the question we ask, like, look at these wonderful choices we have to allow to receive notifications or not. And I'm sure that there must be somebody running an A/B test, because just a couple of days later, they replaced it with something that performed much, much better. Right? Oh, that's obviously much, much better. And these are kind of all ridiculous examples, but these things are everywhere, which is kind of what made me really, really sad, right? So if you look at all these bubbles, red bubbles, that kind of play on our psychology, trying to trigger us into clicking somewhere. I've never been to watch ever in my life, but it shows me that there are notifications waiting for me there, right? And all these things, where you go to booking.com, and I don't know how many other services, and they tell you, oh, this person just booked that thing that you just missed out on, right? And if you look what's happening behind the scenes, it's just a little script that randomly combines names, locations, product images, prices, and everything in between to create this illusion as if somebody was buying at this very moment. And it's not very surprising that these kind of tools or scripts, some of the most popular ones in the world today, which are bought the heaviest, right? Because we want people to feel like they need to buy something now. So for this year, I decided to do two things consistently for the entire duration of that year. And it was a very sad year for me. Starting from January 1st, every time somebody is going to send me a link to a service or an app, I'm going to go to extremes to read out the privacy policy in its entirety. Anybody read the privacy policy completely? A couple of people. The other thing that I decided to do, every time I'm going to a website and there is this wonderful cookie pop-up. Do you know what I mean with cookie pop-up? Right? I'm going to go to extremes to opt out from every single tracker. And just to see how difficult they make my life, basically, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those people who is going to install a Tor client and, I don't know, have thousands of extensions that block everything. But I was really trying to understand where GDPR is coming from, what the role of privacy today is, and what impact we as designers made on the world around us, right? And so this was a really, really strange year because I ended up with seeing things that I would never be able to unsee. So every time you install WhatsApp, for example, you can opt out from being tracked. But can you find the area here where you would be able to, opt out from being tracked? Of course you would, right? It's right there behind other options at the bottom. You click at other options, and then you can uncheck that box. Because of course everybody would come up with that. Everybody would see that. When I was signing up for a Wi-Fi hotspot, F-Secure, well, obviously I have to read the terms and privacy policy. It takes a bit of time, longer than using the Wi-Fi most of the time. Apparently I almost agreed to assign my firstborn child to them for the duration of eternity, right? Well, when I asked about if they will be actually using this, enforcing that clause, they said no, but that's just ridiculous. Anybody using Amazon? Have you read the privacy policy of Amazon? Well, I did, and it was a wonderful lecture for the entire Sunday. And if you look into Amazon Web Services service terms, it's approximately like 84 sections that you can read. It's a great thing for Friday night. Great, right? And if you go to point 57.10, you'll find very remarkable, and what I found to be quite interesting and exciting, zombie apocalypse clause. which is not a joke. Because among many other things, they also built a so-called Lumberyard engine, game engine. And you can build ninjas and robots and zombies with that tool. But if you happen to use that tool to build any ninjas or robots or anything that might lead to the fall of organized civilization, that's not their fault. They're not liable, right? And so you will find all these really thin things. Like anybody using Tinder? Okay, this is a very personal question. Sorry. But Tinder, among many other things, collects not only the data of what you like, what you don't like, but how far you tilt your device when you're looking at the picture, how long, of course. All the things are being collected. Every single point of interaction is being collected. Anybody is familiar with Face app? It was kind of making rounds for a while. And again, when somebody sends me a link, I have to read it in its entirety. And it really confuses me. Because every time I end up with this kind of tools, right, I start thinking and looking, how come that the tools per se are kind of not really well designed? It seems like there wasn't much thought put into it, but they always put a lot of thought creating the most remarkably longest, right, privacy policy you've ever seen in your life. That's really, really huge, and the worst part about it, actually, is the fact that not only get all the rights to everything that you submit and post, so if you post a picture of your child, for example, obviously that picture belongs to them. But what's even more remarkable, they can use this picture in any way they like, in any product they're going to develop in their lifetime. And more than that, they also can actually serve it away and give it away to third parties and set a device identifier on your device and keep other advertisers, tracking you or what you're doing. Right? And all this are really remarkable. Now, you don't have to read all of this. Right? And the reason why I'm here today is because I want to highlight some of the things that are important to know today. Right? One of the services which is really, really great is this little website, Terms of Service in Thread. Right? So if you, for example, use a particular service or tool in your company, but you don't want to end up with legal fees or legal issues showing up later because you might be not respectful of GDPR, for example, it kind of highlights everything that happens to users' data, because for designers and developers and managers and everybody in between, it is your responsibility to say that if somebody, like a European Union citizen, wants to be forgotten, it is your responsibility to go to third parties and make sure that this data is irrevocably removed, right? So we kind of need to know what is happening to that data. Well, seems like a very simple thing, but it's really, really useful in many ways. But it's much, much deeper than that. And if we start looking deeper, we find out crazy things are happening. So YouTube was serving ads with CPU-draining cryptocurrency miners, where you, while watching video, do crypto mining for somebody else, right? Isn't that nice, right? Who doesn't want to just serve their machine to be used for crypto mining, right? And so we started fighting back, right? With things like ad blocker, for example, right? How many of you are using some sort of an ad blocker? Right? And you definitely should be. Right? If you're not using one, it's definitely a good idea to have one. Because when you kind of look into what is happening there, we have to protect ourselves. For example, there is a war going on, a huge war. Facebook changes the class names and HTML on the Facebook page every single day, 5 to 6 times, trying to nest and kind of do things to hide this sponsored area, sponsored text, so it will not be easy to block. Right? So you will be bombarded with all these messages. And I remember vividly, 2 years ago, when AdBlock Plus was in court, because many of the companies like Facebook and Instagram and the same thing, and others actually filed lawsuit against ad blockers to make them illegal. Well, they lost, and in the end, we ended up with tools like this, right? Block ad block, where you can stop ad blocking on your site now. Ironically, the moment when this showed up, just 1 day later, there was an anti-ad block killer, which is essentially an ad blocker, right? And it's been going on like forever, and it's all happening behind the scenes, right? And so we're using all these tools. Anybody using Ghostery maybe, by any chance? So if you're using Ghostery, they might want to reconsider, mostly because they also help advertising industry to gather data about what people like to block and then try to unblock it. Apparently, it's a really big business, so you have to be really cautious about that. But we ended up with all these tools, right? Which, for a long time, I thought that I'm the only person who is crazy enough to install all of them. Like Facebook container to maintain or contain Facebook. The new innovation this year, stop chat pop-ups. Right? It's just an extension that blocks all pop-ups from Intercom and others. right? Track this. This is great. Essentially, you choose your profile, and if you want to skew the profile that Instagram has on you, it opens 100 tabs targeting specifically trackers, and you can create a new profile, like you are super healthy rich, right? And you're interested in casinos and jewelry and all of that. So you're getting very, depersonalized tracking as a result. And many, many browsers are actually working along this space as well, trying to provide us with some tools to prevent tracking from happening. So where is it coming from? Why does it matter? Right? When I started doing these interviews, I found out that all these things are kind of happening today without us even noticing them. Right? So whenever somebody encounters a pop-up or model, they're going to be automatically blocked. Whenever you're getting a push notification, blocked. Chat window pop-up, mostly blocked. Feedback pop-up, please give us some feedback, block. Install app prompt, block. Importing contacts, well, we've learned from LinkedIn situation, when all the friends, all your contacts were kind of spammed all of a sudden with LinkedIn, that we will not allow that, so it will be blocked. Geolocation permission, please give us access to your location, blocked. GDPR, okay. I have nothing to hide, so what cookies, what's the big deal with cookies, right? And then advertising ban was blocked. Oh, here's a fun one. Whenever somebody tells you, please turn off your ad blocker, please, right? There are two established strategies that people tend to use, which for a long time I thought that I'm so clever. Well, I'm not clever. One strategy is, let's open an incognito or private window and use the site there. Anybody using it? Well, you seem like smart people, right? The other one is, well, there is always, well, often, there is a second browser for these kind of things. Maybe for gambling and other things. There's always this kind of browser where you would use in case somebody asks you to turn off a net blocker. But you will not let them in. This is not very common, right? Access to camera and photos, microphone, all blocked. Email input. Here's a fun one. Imagine you're at the airport and you want to get into Wi-Fi, right? So you need to provide some sort of login to sign in, right? And there are 4 options for you. You can sign in with Instagram, with Twitter, with Facebook, or with email. Okay? Who would sign in with Instagram? You do want that Wi-Fi. No, we won't let them in. No. Twitter, Instagram is our darling. This is a special place. No, we won't let them in. Who would use Twitter to sign in? Maybe because Twitter is not that popular anymore, right? Who would use Facebook to sign in? Maybe 7, 10 people or so. Who would use email to sign in? Well, what kind of email would that be? Because we have 2 levels of emails, right? We have our private, really nice, kind email, the one that we keep private. We will not share it with anybody, right? And then we have, the other email. Email full of account sign-ups and newsletters you never read and promos and everything else in between, right? And it's really, really hard to get that email. It's almost impossible to get that email. But most of the time we ended up in this one, right? I would love to see that database with all these horrible, horrible email inventions that people come up with for that imaginary email friend, right? Mine, by the way, just in case you're wondering, is always marcus@gmail.com. Poor Marcus. But, he gets lots of messages from me, right? So email input is really, really hard to get right. So if you ask somebody for the email, most of the time it's going to be not the important one. And that's very important because if you want to send an email campaign or marketing campaign, you want to reach people with the addresses where they actually live, where they actually check, right? That's really important. A video autoplay, well, capture, what can you do with capture? Right? And there is always this notion, I have nothing to hide, so what's the big deal? So what if Facebook knows stuff about me? Right? Anybody shares this kind of perspective? So what's the big deal? Anybody? That's okay, it's a safe place. Okay? Well, I think this is a very dangerous thing because we don't know what happens to our data. This year has been a very bad year because of this. This was the age of menstrual surveillance where many pregnancy apps, where many people are using, collect the data and they also happily give away the data to the highest bidder. It could also be a manager, it could be a colleague, it could be anybody, right? Because they collect the data for this sole purpose of being sold at some point. Right? And because you sign up for that service, you gladly accept the terms and conditions giving them that data. Right? That's one thing. Another thing, many pregnancy apps are actually doing that. So you have to be really kind of watch out for this. And even further than that, which is totally crazy and unethical, right? You also end up with these things. Would you like your health insurance to know how often you go to the gym, what you eat, when you eat, and everything in between? This is not the business, right? But this data is being collected and actually can be sold anonymously or not anonymously, depending on what your settings are, to the highest bidder, which is really, really remarkable. And in fact, this has some tremendous complications, because you think about this, where one of the companies accidentally stumbled upon the point of information where they found out that the parents of that, or customers of that company are expecting a baby, and they sent them a gift because they're expecting a baby without their consent. That would freak me out, right? Because this data is available, it's out there, and it's collected, and it can be used. Anybody had this experience? You're talking to a friend about something, and all of a sudden, that thing that you spoke about shows up on Instagram or Facebook or anything, right? And it's not really like a phantom living somewhere. There are actually hundreds of segments of audio being sent back to Facebook service or Instagram service every day, and they are kind of analyzed and studied, and so based on that, the information is then provided. And you might say, well, okay, this is kind of scary. Well, it gets much worse. I'm going to show you this video, and I'm a little bit over time, way over time actually, but it's crazy, the things that you can do on the web with that data, just horrible. Look at that.
The Spinner is a new
and this
online
is not
service
a
that
fake
enables
thing,
one
it's
to
a real
control
thing.
articles presented to a pre-chosen specific individual on the websites he or she usually visits in order to subconsciously seed a message in their minds. That person, the target, is exposed to hundreds of items strategically placed as editorial content, repeating the same message over and over and over again. Whether it is propose marriage, quit smoking, initiate sex, or stop riding motorcycles. How does it work? The basic package offers a set of 10 different articles presented to the target 180 times over a 3-month period. The articles, along with their eye-catching headlines, are chosen by a group of psychologists in order to influence the target on a subconscious level. The Spinner sends you an innocent-looking link. The link is sent to the target via text message. When the target presses the link, a cookie connected to the link attaches itself to the target's phone. From this point, the target will be strategically bombarded with articles and media specified for him or her. The story of The Spinner was covered by Rolling Stone, Financial Times, New York Post, The Sun, and many others.
It's crazy. This is just horrible. This is just, what is the world in which we're living? It's unbelievable. And the worst part, it's out there, and it costs $49. It's just $49 to bombard a particular individual with whatever message you want to see it in their minds. Right? Have you asked yourself, how come is it that we actually never ended up with these premium accounts for Instagram and WhatsApp and all the other services? I mean, what if you had a chance to actually opt out from all the tracking advertising? Well, because it's not really relevant. It's not really useful. If you pay like $5, that's nothing compared to what you can get, right? And there are a couple of companies. One of them is being this huge, huge, huge mega monster Axiom, where on every single person in the world, there are approximately 10,000 data points already collected. They know all of us much better. The systems know all of us much better than our friends and our dogs and our families and relatives and everybody else combined, right? And they know us much better than us, right? And so in all this debate about these horrible freaks going around making sure that everybody understands the value of privacy, right? I think that one thing is often forgotten, right? Like these day-to-day battles. You don't want your manager to find out that you're looking for another job before you found another job. Right? You don't want your partner to find out that you're planning to propose from Instagram, them kind of finding out about that on Instagram, because there are like Instagram ads showing up about engagement rings. Right? All those things are really, really important, so kind of tracking is becoming a real, real issue, not because, everybody has to be, has something to hide, but because we have to protect what belongs to us and is nobody else's business. And so when it comes to solution for this, actually, this beautiful, shiny thing is providing one of them, and it's not the best one, but it's kind of a move in the right direction. It's very important for all of us. It doesn't matter if we're designers, developers, managers, or anything, to understand what is the direction that we're heading at. I need like 10 more minutes. No reply, I guess it is a yes, right? So GDPR is, I'm not going to go into details about all of that, but essentially it's a new regulation coming up from European Union. And it's a fantastic reading material for Friday night as well, by the way. And it doesn't come out of nowhere. If you're wondering, what the hell is this, where is it coming from? It is coming from 1995, where was the very first directive about the intellectual law, right? And about the protection of personal data. And then the GDPR is one part of this renewal of that thing. And in fact, it's really a long thing, but it's really, in basics, it's really, really simple. Because in the end, it's all about protecting data by default, right? We have this notion of privacy by design, which means that by default, as a customer or a user of a service, you don't have to do anything. Your data is protected, right? But if you need, as a owner of a site, to know some information about the user, you have to ask politely for that. Like building up a relationship. Whenever you meet somebody, not like asking, hey, I need your commitment right now, forever. You go to a website, they give you this wall of information, commit or go away, right? This is kind of awkward and weird. So what we need to look into kind of moving away from this wall of text, privacy, where you get everything from a user, to something that you kind of progressively ask for, like permissions for notifications, for access to geolocation, and so on and so forth. And so privacy is a default setting, right? And every time we need to ask for something, we actually need some information, we need to ask for it. Right? Now it goes, of course, a little bit deeper than that, but the most important thing is that we are not allowed to collect any data without users' consent. And this is kind of the main overarching goal of GDPR. Right? Now, in reality, this has been implemented like this. We've seen all these cookie pop-ups for many, many, many months now, right? Where review our cookie policy, and the best part is at the bottom, because by clicking I accept, which is the button, or X on this banner, which is the right upper corner, or using our site, you consent to the use of cookies unless you have disabled them. This is not a choice. You can click on the button or not, it doesn't matter because you are actually seen as the silent consent. There is no such thing as silent consent according to the GDPR, right? So this is not GDPR compliant. And you might wonder, so what? So we're here in Georgia, or they're there in the US, so what can happen to us? Well, the way it works is this. Anybody who is living in European Union or is a resident, not necessarily a citizen, but is a resident of European Union, right, has access to have full control about the data. So they can file a complaint in the so-called chief information officer in their country, and that country can then file actually a complaint against your company. And that means that you can be blocked very fast and very quickly in the entire European Union if you don't comply. You might get a fine, which is just 20% of your annual revenue. Nothing, right? But if you're, most of the time for small companies, you'll just be blocked, right? In the US, it's much more interesting because you end up with really nice companies that have a lot of money and don't respect users' data, right? So you can earn much more, which is why we saw many, many, many complaints coming mostly to the US and not to Europe, right? And very often you end up with these options. Beautiful. Cookie settings. Because by default, you may not ask too much, right? So you ask only for necessary thing. And the necessary is marked, right? But then if you look at the button, it says select all and confirm. Oh, isn't that nice? And so respectful, that's great. And it's actually even been more like a trend, right? The necessary is selected because this is what GDPR forces you to do, right? But then allow all cookies or manage cookie settings. Very beautiful, right? And there are great options that you can use. This is not one of them. This is one of them. We have to explain why you collect some data and what kind of data you're collecting, right? And there's like a slider, and then you can drive and say, okay, I do want some personalization on that service, so maybe I will allow that as well, right? And a couple of other things. But most importantly, you always need to have a choice, right? Many applications don't have a choice. So here's the choice. You accept or do not accept. But it's really important to understand where it's all heading, right? Because over the last year, we've been moving away from this grace period starting from May 2016, where everybody could try and experiment and play with it and so on and so forth, to what this really interesting, strange thing, where you can actually file a complaint as a service. That's great. So anybody who knows AirHelp or many of those companies, where if your flight is delayed, you're going to get the compensation from them, right? There is kind of something similar showing up here. File a GDPR complaint about a company that misuses your data and pay us 30% cut, right? So for many companies, or for many people, individuals, it's a really easy way to, especially if you're a lawyer, to get good money, right? And also for many customers, it's a good idea to protect the data this way. But for many companies, that's a really big deal because they might end up paying a ridiculous fee. Right? And there have been 95,000 complaints filed just last year, mostly again against American companies, by the way. And also, there are many, many, many examples of where it went just ridiculously wrong. Right? All of those things were, for example, in France, I believe, where the students' or pupils' faces were recorded and saved without their permission. And, oh, this is an insurance thing, this is something else. And the company had to pay, oh, this one, 200,000 SEK, which is, I'm not sure how, but how much, I think, in euros as well. Right, so all the things are kind of happening. And also there is this huge debate now about Google Analytics. So using Google Analytics, you might be compliant, might be not compliant, it's not quite clear yet. But if you think about this entire thing, it's more like an evolving standard that's going to change as the time passes by, and it's just the beginning. Because starting from January 1st, California introduces the CCPA. Anybody heard of it? This is a new law which is like GDPR light, where it's also more control about the private data. If you have any customers from California, you have to treat them their data in the same way you do with GDPR, but a little bit differently, right? So this is all kind of just a starting point. And even worse than that, there have been some ridiculous proposals. I've been in discussions, but I thought this cannot be happening. So how many of you are designers-ish? Okay, developers? Something else, I guess, right? Right, that works. It's been ridiculous because, you know, I was having this conversation with somebody from legal department in California. And they were having this real debate, thinking, why do designers and developers and all these creatives, and that's what they did, creatives, think that they're any special? You know? So, you know, everybody can just wake up in the morning and say, hello, I'm an artist. Or like, oh, hello, I'm a designer. I know Sketch, I'm a designer. Right? Or Photoshop. So the same way somebody could wake up and say, yeah, you know what? That's it. I'm a developer today. I'm a developer. But you can't just wake up in the morning and say, hello, I'm a doctor today. Right? Oh, hello, I'm a lawyer today. That's not how it works. Right? Lawyer, to become a lawyer, you need to go and study and get a degree. And you need to practice, and then you become a lawyer. Right? The same goes for doctors. So the discussion went, shouldn't designers and developers just, you know, be like normal people? You know, they go to school, they study, they get a degree, and then they actually can practice design and development, right? Because we are really living like in the Wild West. We do what we want, right? But if you look again at the Facebook and Instagram and the like, you know, we have tremendous power and responsibility on the society as a general. And these conversations are kind of weird. I don't want to have this kind of, you know, legislation as a layer between design and development. It would be just ridiculous. But this kind of shows us where it's heading. Now, one more thing that's really important to understand here, though, is that we need a really good kind of candidate for our choices, right? So if you've been using Quantcast as a solution for GDPR, please think again, because there is now an ongoing investigation about Quantcast not being GDPR compliant, selling GDPR compliant solutions which are not GDPR compliant. That's kind of sad, I would say. But most importantly, this is an ongoing thing, a debate right now. Where right now there is this wonderful portal on European Union law, where they understood that the things that designers and developers have built so far, these cookie pop-ups, they're not working, right? So if we look here, this consent rule and the cookies, most people don't understand them and they just totally accept tracking. This is not the point. And so there is this new renewal of it, which is going to come later this year, by the way, just in December or so, which is also called as a privacy directive. And essentially the rule is very, very cool. You will end up with a browser setting. We're probably living in a place right now where all these cookie pop-ups will going to fade away and be gone next year, which is really great for all of us. But it's really, really horrible for many advertisers or marketing people, mostly because the intent is, by the law, to make sure that the setting to track or not be tracked will be working or defined on the browser level. So you update your browser, be it Chrome, Firefox, or whatever, you're going to be asked, would you like to be tracked? What would you answer to that? Yes, so this is probably most of us will not confirm to that, right? But then this will be saved as a setting in browser once, and then that setting will be advertised to every website you are visiting. And so it's going to be your responsibility as designers or developers to respect that setting and serve the experience that's actually respectful of that setting, instead of having just a pop-up asking for permission every time, right? So we're living in this world where actually things seems to be changing. Where in the past, we were used to this thing, the website uses cookies, accept or walk away. It looks like we're twisting it and changing it into something like, please allow us to share information on you with 43 other companies. No, don't share, being the default, and then learn more to agree would be the other option. Now that would make consent a bit more proactive, I would say. However, if your entire business is working around collecting data from somebody, this will be a major, major concern for you in the next year, right? Maybe it will be a little bit different, but most of the time what we will end up with is something that's a bit more respectful. You collect what you need right away, and Google Analytics actually, or any kind of analytics will be compliant, will be okay with the new regulation, but everything else will have to be kind of opt-in. And it's actually a really, really good thing. And if you want to learn a bit more about this, there are a couple of really good tools that you can learn from. One of them is this GDPR compliance checklist. I will also send out a link with all the slides anyway. And the option, which is really GDPR compliant, is this one, where essentially you have two options. You can customize, you can confirm, right? But one final thing that's really important to understand here is I'm not trying to make people, too obsessed or too afraid of things that are happening, but it's really important to consider this. And still, despite all of that, it doesn't mean that we need to make, to keep privacy boring. So anybody likes a good pop-up? For me, this is a great pop-up. This is the best pop-up I've seen in my life, and I would love it to be on every single website out there. It's really annoying, it's really difficult to close, but it kind of fits within the story. It's really, really fun, right? Same way, when you need somebody else's data, just ask about it in a more creative way, right? So here in the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society, if you want to buy a bottle of whiskey to sell someone, to give a gift to somebody, they're asking you for date of birth, but most companies don't care, and they don't care either. You can type in 32nd day of 43rd month of 1547, and you still may enter the site because they don't care. If you want to lie, just go ahead and lie. But you can make it more fun. Like they do in Austin Beer Works. They ask you, are you 21? If you say yes, you enter the site and you're done. Right? But if you answer no, it becomes a story. Well, they ask you a couple of questions. Right? And more questions and more. It's kind of you choosing your own adventure, if you like. And this is just to say that, when you think about privacy, you think about something that's very boring and, people with shields protecting the privacy. But it's also about having some fun as well, right? And there is no way to close this window, by the way, at this point. So you have to click on no, and then off we go. You end up with a video, which is customized for your needs, right? What about the title? Everybody likes the title in the checkout. This is the most boring thing ever, right? We know exactly why you need the title, because you want to spam people according to the preferences or the gender, right? So maybe you can find a more creative way to ask for the title. You don't have to ask for Mr., Miss, whatever. Just go overboard. What would you like to be today? Like, maybe, I would love to get like a message saying, oh, here's a shipping for Prince, whatever, right? And it's a really huge list. It's like 65 options or so, right? So go ahead and choose what you want to. And even things like this, when you have authentication and logging in, logging out, right? I don't know if you've seen it before, but why not be a bit more playful, right? We tend to think that we need to really avoid and keep everything straightforward. But if you bring this level of personality and a little bit of emotional connection to your interface, even if it relates to privacy, it's really great. It works well. And it communicates what it needs to communicate as well, right? So that's pretty cool, right? And maybe it's a good idea to make people wait sometimes. Just make them wait. That's cool. Or the final one, and it's my favorite, what about just something like a toggle? You know, this little thing, please opt out from whatever email, newsletter, subscription, and so on. Just if somebody wants to opt in, make it a bit more difficult for them to opt in. Oh, it doesn't play. No. Right, so maybe make them click twice or 3 times, or maybe 4 to actually opt in. Right? And this is a real character playing there, right? So why not? So all of this to say, basically, privacy is very important. Yeah, I can look at it all day long. right? So privacy is a very important thing, but most importantly, it's all about protecting what belongs to you and is nobody else's business. And it doesn't mean that we cannot involve and evolve and create new design patterns and find better ways, but it looks like there is a lot of movement from a legislation perspective and from the design perspective as well to make things a bit more better, to bring the sense of control to our data, which is again what GDPR is all about. Right? It's not perfect, and like nothing is perfect first time, right? But looking at the next 3, 4, 5 years, it looks like we'll be in a much safer place. And many browsers understood that as well, introducing all these tracking prevention mechanisms in the browsers as well. So just to wrap up here, I think I would love to leave you with this video, which I think really heavily defines the kind of the world we can live in. I would love to see way more applications like this around the world. And let me turn on the audio here now.
You might wonder how blind people deal with everyday challenges. Well, normally the answer is simple. We're not that different from you. We play music. We go to school. We go to work. You get the picture. But sometimes the simplest things can be difficult, and we need a pair of eyes.
Connect to
first available helper.
That's where you come in.
establishing video connection.
Through your smartphone, Be My Eyes connects the blind with sighted people through a live video connection. Simply choose if you need help or want to help by the click of a button.
That's a nice picture of you and your family, Caroline. Is it for a present? Yes, it's a photo from my parents.
You can help just by installing the Be My Eyes app,
Print image.
and we'll notify you when someone needs your help. And if you're in the middle of something, don't worry. Someone else will step in.
That milk is way too old.
So, would you care to be my eyes?
You know, so one thing that's really important to understand here is, I know very often, I have to stop it. Very often we think about, we design the interfaces, and yes, they have the shiny buttons, and we do a lot of A/B testing to make sure that the buttons are just right and all of that. In that case, the shape of a button, the radius, border radius on it, it doesn't matter, right? As long as it's big enough, that's what matters. And this is where we solve a real problem, real challenge that we have in the world, right? At the same time, if these people cannot see the interface, they cannot click away that cookie pop-up, right? This is not up to them. And so I would feel very uncomfortable knowing that the most vulnerable people, not necessarily the blind people, but also the elderly people, blind people, the disabled people, everybody, they might be sometimes the most vulnerable ones, right? And we can't just, play poker with the data. We shouldn't, right? With this in mind, just to lift up the spirits, another video, which is the story of my life in 40 seconds. The world is not perfect. We can make it a bit better, right? And we can make things a bit more exciting and interesting on the web, but the most important thing is that it's never perfect, and we should just give away from this notion of living in a perfect world. So welcome to my world, which is not perfect, but it's also unsatisfactory. Mad world. Oh, it's also sad, damn it. Okay, well, with this in mind, thanks to Prolo Studio for the video. But I have cats, and cats, if you have any questions, please come to me and meow, and thank you for listening.